All right. Well, why don't I start get started with kind of the organized portion of the festivities. This was all just kind of pregame, I guess. Um, I don't think Mark's on yet, but I'm sure he'll hop on shortly. Um, thank you everybody for joining. It's great to have folks here. I'm sure we'll have some more trickling in as we go. Um, Very cool to celebrate the release of the book and get to chat team building with some of my favorite folks and have kind of an inside the pylon reunion. It's pretty cool. Um, Couple boilerplate things. We're recording this. I think you would have all gotten a thing. It's going streamed to YouTube. I think everyone's muted as they join except the host. If you want to submit a question, let us know via chat and we'll take a look at that and try to incorporate that in. We're going to try to keep this to a tight hour. I built in a little buffer there, but we'll try to keep it brief. We can all go on, I think, a bit, but a plug before we get started. I posted this on Twitter earlier today. You know, this is a free event. People are donating their time, and that's great. If you have the means to do so, I'd encourage people to make a charitable contribution to the Epilepsy Foundation, give.epilepsy.com. It's National Epilepsy Awareness Month, and this is a personal issue for me. I've got a daughter with epilepsy. I know, Jeff, you do too. So, you know, it's just a cool opportunity to use this vehicle to raise some awareness and maybe a little bit of money as we go. So, you know, I really appreciate anything people do there. I'd like to introduce the co-hosts. So why don't we start with so we'll start with Dan. Dan Hatman is the director of the Scouting Academy. And Dan, I think I got an email. You guys just opened your spring registration.
Yeah.
It's probably the best route to working in the NFL, short of having a parent who worked in the NFL. I know folks who've gone through it have learned a ton about player evaluation. I know you've shared a lot of materials about kind of the scouting process and all that stuff. Dan's a tremendous resource. Worked in personnel for, I believe it's the Giants, Jets, and the Eagles, correct?
Correct.
And Dan wrote a master's thesis on the role of the general manager. Worked on Inside the Pylon with us for years, and just a huge resource for me in terms of understanding, you know, what goes on inside the industry, but also has like a just tremendous perspective from thinking about this stuff for a long time. I'm not sure I could have written this book without Dan. So I guess
kind, sir.
This is the thing people would be clapping, I guess, if we were doing this in a room, but
no need.
We have Mark Schofield, fresh off a call with Formula One folks, I believe. Mark and I go way back to Sons of Sam Horn, Blinded by the Lombardies Forum, founding member of Inside the Pylon, and just a heavy hitter there. Has gone on to write a ton of other things. Wrote the 17 Drives book, wrote for USA Today, the SCO Show podcast, which a lot of the folks here from or met from that. QB Factory. Now writes for SB Nation, doing a lot of NFL and Formula One, and just one of the best people to talk about the NFL, especially offense and quarterbacks.
It is an absolute honor to be here. Dave, I just cannot say enough good things about. It's on the Kindle right here. I've been reading it. I skipped ahead to the chapter on quarterbacks. I hope you understand. I mean, that's where I went first, but it's all absolutely tremendous. Just massive congratulations to you, my friend. It's just an incredible piece of work.
All right. Thanks. And last but not least, emceeing the event for us tonight is Jeff Feyerer. Jeff was also an ITP long timer, and he also hosted the Pylon U podcast, which I think we all miss, a great resource on the college game. And you guys got into the draft quite a bit. It's one of my favorite people to talk team building with. Jeff was one of the first people that I told about this project. And we used to just call each other sometimes just to like bounce half-baked ideas off each other and chat. Team building, that was a big inspiration for me as I formulated a lot of what went into this book. So wouldn't do this without Jeff, and it's great to have him on, and he's going to point guard for us and help keep things moving. So thanks, Jeff.
Absolutely, and thank you again for asking me. And it's only because I have nothing at all to plug whatsoever. But, we talk a little about Inside the Pylon, and for those, I don't know if there's any on here that aren't or weren't familiar with Inside the Pylon, but, in its heyday, and now you'll see if there's an Inside the Pylon tree that came from all the writers that were associated, they're now doing big things now, and people that are involved with it, not just Mark, Dave, and Dan, but a number of people out there. I mean, it was a great community for both exchanging ideas and learning. And that's really what, I'd like to joke that on the Pylon U podcast, my co-host Shane Alexander and I, we got along great, but our views on everything could be a little different, could skew differently. And he's an SEC guy, I'm a Big Ten guy. But the one guy that I always felt like whose ideas of team building, roster construction lined up with mine was Dave's. So when I heard the idea he was going to do this book, I was beyond excited, and I'm really, really, Dave, and all Dan and Mark have said this as well. I'm extraordinarily happy for you, and it's on the nightstand right now. I believe I fell asleep with it, and I woke up. It was in my daughter jumped into bed with us last night, and she was laying on it, and I had to pry it out from underneath her. So, but thank you again for having me, and we'll get started, I guess, in the most basic of ways here, Dave. Tell us about The Inches We Need, and how did it come to be? Like, what was the trigger that said, I need to write this book?
Well, I think initially it was kind of a process where I started off writing a lot of X's and O's stuff, but you talked about the Inside the Pylon tree. We've got Mark Schofield and Ted Wynn and Daniel Said and Matty Brown and Ledyard and Brandon Thorne. They didn't need me to write X's and O's too much. So I was always kind of a nerdy team building guy. And in the book, I talk about, simming seasons and sports games so I could get to the off season. And it just felt natural to develop that. And with folks like you and Dan there to help me kind of develop some of my ideas. I got this idea a long time ago, and I really started it about 5 years ago in earnest, and doing it as that kind of protracted process has took me way too long. But the neat thing about that was I really got to focus on core concepts, because the specific strategies that work today aren't the same ones that were necessarily working 2, 3, 4 years ago, aren't necessarily the same ones that are going to be working 2, 3, 4 years from now. So I really honed in on, I'm going to share my screen if that's all right, the what I call the pyramid of success, which sounds very
it's like a Ted Lasso sort of thing right there.
It's a business school dorky stuff there. Oh, is that coming through yet? And so these are the core concepts that I outlined, and I'll talk about that more in a second. And then as I went through, I really wanted to kind of explore different areas of team building, but also pepper in case studies where you could see, okay, this is an example of a team going through, like the Rams approach with trading their first round draft picks. And I wrote about that. And I tried to write about the areas where they had a vision and it was good and there were a lot of merit to it and things were thought out, and then the drawbacks of it. Really tried to present both sides of as many different issues as I could, so you could read and come to your own conclusions. And these concepts are kind of a through line through the whole book. So At the bottom of the period, we have kind of the basic competence tier. You've got to have a vision, some kind of plan, and you got to have alignment around that vision. If your front office is looking for certain players that your coaching staff doesn't know how to use, your coaching staff doesn't optimize the players that they're getting in, how can you be successful? And we see a lot of teams fall down on that stuff. And owner support, I think that's often taken for granted, but I think there are plenty of examples of owners who are meddling or set up kind of dysfunctional organizational structures, or just don't have the patience to see through the vision of the front office. In the middle tier, and I kind of use Jim Collins, the great business writer's verbiage here for the top two, we have good to great. I think the best teams are looking for something to make them different than the other 32 teams. Bill Belichick has talked about this. Howie Roseman has talked about this. Les Snead has talked about this. And all those guys are doing things differently from each other, as well as the other 32 or 31 teams. So I think a great example of uniqueness is the Legion of Boom Seahawks, where they came on the scene and they were looking for very different players than the rest of the league. So not only did they build a great defense, they were number one in scoring defense 4 years in a row. They didn't have to invest that much to do it because teams weren't looking for cornerbacks like Richard Sherman. A lot of teams probably felt like he didn't have the lateral quickness and agility that they were looking for, but Pete Carroll knew this guy can press at the line. He can play physical. He's got ball skills, and we don't need him to, trail the jitterbug receivers over the middle of the field because we're playing a zone scheme where he's got the sideline. So I think that's a great example of uniqueness leading to a market, being able to exploit a market inefficiency with those kind of players. And of course, they were trendsetting with all the Spark stuff and really utilizing those combine metrics to find explosive players. Where I think the Seahawks maybe didn't have some of the staying power of some of the other dynasties is once they got successful, you saw a lot of copycats. You saw a lot of their assistants get hired elsewhere, and suddenly they weren't the only team looking for those kind of players anymore. And that's why at the top of the pyramid, again, to use Jim Collins' verbiage, the built to last teams really try to change and adapt as they go through. The Patriots, I think, are the best example. They've gone from 3-4 to 4-3 and back, from 1 high to 2 high and back, from under center run game to spread offense to 2 tight end. And I think it can be challenging to marry this change and adapt philosophy with having a vision. And I think the genius of the Patriots is they build it in because Bill Belichick fundamentally is a game plan coach. He's not like Bill Walsh, where he's associated with one scheme. He's game planning to be able to attack your weakness week to week, play to play, year to year. And so a lot of what he pursues are versatile players who are sometimes misfits in more conventional schemes. And the example I use in the book is Kyle Van Noy, who's drafted into a 4-3. He was kind of a jack of all trades, master of none, and he really didn't fit in Detroit. But with New England, he could kind of do a little bit of everything and be very successful there. And the Patriots have had a lot of, similar kinds of players that they've gotten a lot of mileage out of. So as I went through, writing this book over 5+ years and researching this topic even longer, I really honed in on these as the core qualities. And lastly, I think the name, The Inches We Need, which is from the Al Pacino halftime speech of Any Given Sunday, says the inches we need are everywhere. And if we add up all those inches, that's going to make the difference between winning and losing. And I think that's very much the team building philosophy as a metaphor, because these are not huge advantages. There's really smart people working for all 32 teams. The advantages you're going to find, the competitive edges, the inches, they're small. So you really have to look everywhere in as many different places as you can. I think the best teams do that. They're looking everywhere they can for some kind of competitive edge.
And I think a lot of that, Dave, to that point is, you see every year, and I think more so than any other league, it's easier for a bad team to get better the next year in the NFL because the inches are so small between really good and really bad. Now, those really bad teams, and I know you talk a lot about in that chapter you talk about the ownership and the coach not jiving. You talk a lot about the Cleveland Browns, and that's just a completely different animal. But I think in most cases, given some kind of the structure that you're talking about, the inches are that important between a team going. And you saw this with the Eagles, and we talked about this on the phone like a week ago. You saw this with the Eagles too, going from 4-11 to 9 wins in the playoffs the next year, and now, one of the more dominant teams in the NFL. So, very salient points there. But it leads into the first question of the night, and you talked a little bit about the Seahawks and them addressing the market inefficiency with the defensive backfield and cover 3 defense. John, I'm going to butcher your last name, and as someone whose last name is butchered all the time, I feel terrible. But see, I'm not even going to do it. Josh Z. What is the biggest market inefficiency for roster building in the NFL right now? And I'll throw that out to Mark and Dan and Dave, the eminently smarter people in this group.
Well, I'm going to check to Dan on that one. I mean, I feel like this is right up his alley.
That's a Dan layup.
Yeah, I think right now when we've seen the Eagles and the Rams exploit this, it's the veteran player trade market. They're just undervalued from what kind of draft compensation you have to get up to acquire them. You're adding starters for 5th, 6th, 7th round pick swaps in certain situations. Sometimes even players on expiring contracts, which are then going to turn around, go to the free agent market, potentially net you that exact pick back, compensatory a year or so later on. As all these little advantages do, they're going to get swallowed up more and more. But I think it's been a way those teams have really launched themselves above others that were in that tier with them over the last 3-4 years. It'll be interesting to see, what some of their teams do to either take that away or try to join that bandwagon. But I think that's been a way for those clubs to really differentiate themselves in the off season or even in season trade market.
Interesting. Mark?
Yeah,
Dave,
I mean, I think, obviously Dan's the person to sort of answer that question. But I think, from where I sort of sit right now, what you're seeing is, and we're all guilty of this. I know I certainly am. We spend so much time on the college scouting evaluation side of things. We get so excited about, especially me, right? I'm for a number of reasons. I am very deep into Caleb Williams and Drake May right now. I'll just say that. But we spend so much time in the sort of college evaluation realm, and we ignore sort of the pro scouting side of things. And this is kind of, I think, something that Dan can speak to, and Dave can certainly speak to from the work that he's done here. But, when Dave was sort of going through that pyramid right now and get into some of the teams at the top and listen to some of those teams like the Patriots, like the Ravens and the Eagles, you see those veteran type moves. You see that sort of, and this is a phrase that I learned from Dan and I will take to my grave. What can he do, right? What can the Kyle Van Noys of the world do for the New England Patriots that they weren't asked to do, or maybe weren't put in a position to do for the Detroit Lions? And so I think the sort of pro scouting side of things and the importance of, the successful teams having an ability, not just to sort of get the college piece, the college evaluation right, but the pro side of it right, I think is critical. And I think the teams that are successful for the long term have that part down too.
I'm glad you brought up the what can he do comment from Dan, because I remember having conversations with Dan when I had written some articles for a couple of years for my roster evaluation pieces, and Dan gave me feedback on it regarding, and I want to say criticism, but because that roster evaluation was presented in a vacuum, it wasn't necessarily asking, they could be valued a lot by this team, but you're also not looking at things that aren't there, like things that they can do if they were in other organizations. So I think that idea of thinking outside the box and not understanding that everyone's not going to fit the same way for every team. And I think Mark, more so than anyone else, as you look at quarterbacks, quarterback is the main position where you need to understand, if you're getting that guy, don't ask him to get in there and expect him to do something he can't do. Don't expect to put him in a system where he's not going to be set up for success.
Yeah, I mean, look, I got an article on the wall that I got quotes from Dan for to that very point. Like, you've got to, particularly at the quarterback position, but obviously at every position, like, get your job as a coach is to get players in a position to be successful. You know, if you're taking Tom Brady in 2023, you're not going to run the Ravens offense where you're asking them to run GT counter. Like, if you do that, you're just going to be set up for failure. You have to take the players that you have and put them in the right positions to be successful. And, you know, thankfully, I think when, at least with respect to the quarterback position, we've gone away from the days of a coach or an offense or a team, a staff drafting a quarterback and saying, this is our offense, you're going to run it. Like, we're seeing, like, look at the Detroit Lions right now. Like, you can go through what Ben Johnson is calling for Jared Goff, and you can see stuff he was running at Cal. I mean, they're dialing up Y cross because they know that he's run it thousands upon thousands of times in his life, and it doesn't matter that he's a veteran quarterback in the NFL. It's what he's comfortable running, so let him run it. Let him be comfortable.
Love that Goff example.
I think the other piece of that, and maybe not straight roster building, but just an inefficiency, is the player development side, which I think is what you're highlighting there. You know, figuring out what they're good at and building on those strengths, as opposed to trying to reinvent the player. We're bringing up that we're in a utilization league. We're not really in a development league anymore. But I think smart teams are finding pockets to develop the players, even if it's just building on the strengths, so that they can add and adapt over time, as opposed to, okay, now we know how to use them, but now they know how to stop that. So what do we do now?
I have a quote in the book from Louis Riddick. I think it's there's no salary cap on coaching and coach development and player development and scouting development, like all that stuff. You can spend as much money on those guys as you want.
Now that gets into owner things. That's a whole different ball of wax right there.
Well, the next question, we'll go to the organization chapter, and there's a large part of Dave's early on chapter about organizations in regards to the Packers, and Dave talks about bringing on Ron Wolf, and Ron Wolf then hiring Mike Holmgren, and them jiving until Mike Holmgren left because he wanted full control. And just that the staying power of that kind of organization, because you'll see that now with Pete Carroll and with John Schneider, it's abnormal for them to be around that long. But the question from Brett Carlson is, what are your thoughts on the current state of the Packers? And it says Jeff response here, but I don't know. I'm going to stay away from any Jordan Love feedback right now. I'm going to leave that to Mark and expect something from Mark here. I will look at this through two different lenses. One, you are seeing what happens when you double down on appeasing Aaron Rodgers for 2 years, when you had enough evidence when they lost to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the NFC Championship game that maybe pivoting away and not going all in was the right idea. The second thing I'll say is that you'll see a lot of people right now comparing, because they both sat for 3 years, they're a similar age, comparing, what Rodgers did in his first year, which is he went 6-10. They scored more than their opposition, though, if you look at points scored versus points allowed, a lot of close games, versus what Jordan Love's doing right now. The difference is that a large part of that 2008 Packers roster had just played in the 2007 NFC Championship game and seen a ton of success. A large part of this roster right now for the Packers is extraordinarily young, and especially the skill positions in the offensive line. When Rodgers started, he had Greg Jennings, he had Donald Driver, he had Ryan Grant. He had an offensive line that was veteran with Chad Clifton, Mark Tauscher. Right now, you've got David Bakhtiari, the centerpiece of all this, who has played one game. The rest of that offensive line is very young and otherwise very hurt. The offensive skill position players outside of Aaron Jones are unproven. So Jordan Love isn't getting a lot of help right now, and you've seen in the play calling from Matt LaFleur that they have not taken the training wheels off too much with him and are slow playing this more so than a lot of people thought. So I think where they had a veteran roster under Rodgers, you're now seeing them maybe slow playing a little more, and you're going to see maybe a lengthier time not being the same Packers as they once were. Mark, do you have any thoughts? And I don't know how much you've seen of Jordan Love yet. What do you think about Jordan Love so far?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about Love, first off, Jeff, a lot of what you said is exactly right. And it sort of gets to a point I know we're going to talk about a little bit later, which is, do you draft the quarterback first? Do you set the team up for the quarterback and then draft the quarterback? And I think what you're seeing right now with Love is he was put into a situation where the offensive line is banned out. You have the Bakhtiari piece, which is a big part of that. You have young skill position players, and you can see moments on film, particularly early in the year, but really sort of continuing to this point where receiver and quarterback are not on the same page. They are not seeing things the same way. They're not seeing things like middle field open, middle field closed the same way. So he loves throwing middle of the field, like he's reading it middle of the field open. The receivers reading it like middle of the field closed, and they're nowhere near each other on it. So I think that's part of the issue. I also think that Love is going through sort of a learning process of, and this was part of who he was at Utah State, and it's why myself and others had reservations about him. At Utah State, he believed he could solve every problem with his arm. And that led to some aggressive reads and decisions, throws downfield that maybe you shouldn't be making. And, I've brought this conversation up a couple of times just this week alone, talking about Jordan Love. But, Jim Gray, Tom Brady, their podcast, they had Josh Allen on like a week or two ago. And Brady extolled the virtues of the check down to Josh Allen, sort of talking through Josh Allen, like, these are some of the issues you're struggling with. Sometimes on 3rd and 7, you feel like you could solve that problem by your rocket right arm and making a throw between two defenders. But sometimes the better throw is the check down, or the better throw is the throw in the dirt. And you look at Love right now, 46 attempts of over 20 yards this year, second most in the NFL, but he's got an adjusted completion percentage of something like 37% on those, 2 touchdowns and 4 picks. Like, he was early in the year trying to solve so many problems, partly because they were getting behind the sticks because they would try to run it on first down and they're banged up offensively, and now it's 2nd and 12. Or, he and the receiver aren't on the same page on 2nd and 12 after you've tried that run on first down. Now it's 3rd and 12, and you just feel like you got to make this throw. So they were putting him in a position where he was forcing throws downfield, being too aggressive, and it would snowball from there. And so I think the thing that I want to see from Love down the stretch, even if it doesn't result in wins, is living for that check down, extolling the virtues of that check down, and getting that sort of A dot down, because his A dot this year has been extremely high throughout the early course of this year. And I want to see him start to get to a point where sometimes a 3rd and 7 check down is your best option.
Yeah, the last game against the Steelers was actually pretty encouraging. One of the picks was to Christian Watson in the end zone, which is an amazing play by I believe it was Patrick Peterson in the end zone. And then the second pick was they were to prevent defense last play of the game, so trying to force them to make it happen. But he made some big boy throws in the game right there to Jaden Reed and Luke Musgrave, and these guys are going to develop. It just is not going to be at the rate that Packers fans are used to. But again, and this is, and Dan, I don't know if you have thoughts on this, and from a team building perspective, going all in with Rodgers. I mean, was there a point where you were, when you're looking at what the Packers were doing with the veterans, where you were like, maybe this isn't the right way to go, because you're mortgaging everything on a guy that could fall off pretty soon?
Obviously, they were putting a lot of picks on the defensive side, right? And that was a lot of the narrative around not giving him weapons and sticking with the veterans. They've converted a lot of their top 100 picks into starters since Gutekunst took over. I was kind of going through that today, just kind of looking at that. I think where it falls a little flat is, while these guys are starting, they're not necessarily performing at a surplus level to what you would expect for their draft position, right? They're playing competent ball, but who's surpassing that, right? Who's the guy that's really dominating? I mean, Alexander from the first class, obviously Jenkins, when he's been healthy, have been great players, but obviously Gary, I think, can continue to come along, we hope. But a lot of those, their players, they're serviceable, right? They're playing fine, but they're not adding anything else. We just talked about Love and trying to having to solve problems because other people aren't creating. It's not there yet. I think that's where they're missing, right? When you look at who are the blue players, who are the guys that you're going to hang your hat on and say, this guy can continue to carry us, whether it be defensively, offensively, what have you, other than just hanging on the quarterback's shoulders. It's hard to point to those players.
Well, before I go off on a Joe Barry tangent, we're going to throw it over to a question about another storied franchise going through some struggles right now.
Can we skip this one? I
Mark,
know the outline. Can we skip this one?
Are you sure?
No,
Are you
no,
sure?
we got to do it. We have to.
We have to. So Josh Bowman asks, given the issues facing New England this year, do the Belichick methods of roster management, team culture, and coaching philosophy no longer work in the modern NFL? And I really feel like there's 45 minutes here for a good response to this
I was
question.
just going to say, how much time do we have?
That
I
is,
mean,
yeah.
You have 45 seconds. Go, ready, go.
The 45-second response is this. This is what happens when you don't have Tom Brady anymore. That's the 45-second response, right? Because, and Dave and I have talked about this, and the Scotia Slack channel has talked about this for a very long time now. The mistakes that you have, like the error band that you have as an organization from a roster construction standpoint, where you can draft some players and miss on them, is so much wider when you have a player like Tom Brady. Like you could draft and miss on players, and it's okay. Tom Brady can fix this. When you don't have the arguably greatest quarterback to ever play this sport, then when you miss on, say, a N'Keal Harry, and you're asking Mac Jones to solve problems with N'Keal Harry, it's not going to work. And this is sort of the snowballing of a lot of missteps from a college evaluation standpoint, you could say. I mean, look at their 2019 draft class. Anybody that's still on the roster, on a roster in the NFL from that draft class, is on another team. That's if they're on a roster right now. Like when you miss an entire draft, that's going to set you back no matter how good you are at other positions. And so I think that's a part of it. It's to the deeper point about the Belichick Patriot way. I wouldn't say that, that doesn't work anymore. I wouldn't say that his coaching philosophy no longer works in the modern NFL. I think it's just, for years we debated Brady versus Belichick. I don't want to say that, look, we've got our definitive answer, but it kind of feels that way. I mean, they got to the playoffs with Mac Jones, but they were bounced immediately. I think this just goes to show you that if you miss in some roster building decisions and you have average to above average quarterback play, you might be able to survive it. If you have greatest quarterback of all time quarterback play, you might be able to still win Super Bowls. If you have Mac Jones, 2013 Mac Jones, you might be looking at 2024 Caleb Williams.
I think too, a couple different things. One is the philosophy of roster management. A lot has been said about Belichick's coaching tree, but his GM tree is actually doing pretty good. I mean,
look at Houston right now.
The last couple of Super Bowls, Jason Light, Les Snead worked for Thomas Dimitroff, who was also successful, who worked under Belichick. And then you look at some of the organizations that maybe don't have Belichick GMs, but have built their scouting infrastructure, like the San Francisco 49ers. Their top scout, John Lynch never worked in scouting, right? Their top scout is Adam Peters. Where did he get his start? New England. Joe Douglas came into Philadelphia and built a lot of their scouting infrastructure. So I think you have, and obviously the Ravens and all the guys who came from that. So I think his philosophy can work. I think it's fair to ask at 71 if, he's the best example of it in 2023. And that's no knock on anybody. My dad's like that. It's like, that's tough out there. And I think, too, when we talk about kind of the inches we need, I think some of the big advantages that he had, like he was willing to trade when like half the teams in the league didn't trade a lot. He got a lot of advantages from that. He got a lot of advantages focusing on positions like slot receiver and slot cornerback and tight end when a lot of the league didn't. And the league is caught up on some of that stuff and they haven't made the counter adjustment to it.
All right. Well, we'll save the rest of that response for another podcast or Zoom meeting we'll do. But the next section on cap, question out there is: are void years a cheat code for the salary cap, or are teams going to regret them down the line? I'll throw that out to the entire group. And if Justin 12 wants to tip his hat here, we got another ITP guy in the chat.
Hello there, Justin.
Hey guys, quick hello, just to keep things moving.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, actually. It's it's midday here in Brisbane, Australia, and it's hot as hell. But no, it's great to see everyone again. You guys all looking well, and it's good to talk. And yeah, it's bringing back some great memories from back in the day. So it's good to get on and talk to you guys. And I've taken time off work to get in. So yeah, wanted to get in and say hello and join in when I can.
Well, get ready for the Bears questions, Justin.
Yeah, Jeff,
Oh,
I feel
no.
like in honor of Justin, we should skip to the
Yeah,
next
Skip,
question.
let's go to the
which
next
is-
let's
question.
go.
Good
I wanna
idea.
hear
Yeah,
this.
yeah. So the Bears might have 2 top 5 picks. What is their dream draft? I've got the Chicago perspective and Chicago radio perspective right now, what their dream draft would be, and having 99% of my friends in the area be Bears fans. But I'm going to let one of the team guys, Dan, if you were the Bears right now, who would you have your eyes on at the top 5 of the draft? You have 2 top 5 picks.
I don't think you can be afraid of taking a quarterback. And this isn't an indictment on Fields. If he ends up being a guy, I don't understand this mentality of we should hold off on acquiring a quarterback because we think we might be holding a lottery ticket. We don't know the percentage chance that it may hit, but if it hits, we're going to have something. So let's just skip on another lottery ticket. No one has the quarterback thing figured out. Okay. The best we've got is Andy Reid drafting up to 10 for Patrick Mahomes and making sure they got him above other teams and putting together a plan. That's about as good of an example as I can find of a team, quote unquote, maneuvering the draft to acquire a quarterback that maybe was undervalued elsewhere. Like the rest of it, we're talking about guys taken in the top 5, right? And they're panning out or they're not panning out, but we're typically talking about taking them right at the top. So I think you go quarterback, right? If you've got one you've got conviction in, I wouldn't be afraid to do that. I have no idea if the way the draft will fall, they can get a Harrison or something like that. Obviously, that young man is different. But continuing to put assets in the offensive line, and I'm kind of cheating a question I think that's going to be up here rather soon. But quarterback and trenches, I don't think you can go wrong.
Yeah, I think that the quarterback one's always an interesting one because for me, I've been a Bears fan since probably about 1987, something like that, and we've never had a truly, I guess a superstar quarterback who does it all. And I think everybody knows here in this call that the Bears are probably the worst team in the NFL in terms of getting that consistent quarterback play. And I think the thing that's frustrating for a lot of us Bears fans is, and myself included, is when we look at the Packers and, when Brett Favre left, they fell straight into Aaron Rodgers and then got another, 15 odd years of top end quarterback play. And I think that's a dream for Bears fans. And I think coming up to now, I've been seeing a lot of talk about, obviously Caleb Williams being probably the number 1 overall pick, most likely. And I've been thinking about it a little bit lately. I've kind of warmed to Justin Fields. I wasn't too hot on him at first, but I've kind of warmed to him. He's obviously injured at the moment. But sort of, I guess, hearing from what Dan's saying, I think the Bears, because they're so desperate to have that, top end quarterback play, that they have to roll a dice. And if he's there for them at 1, 2, 3, wherever it might be, regardless of how they feel about Fields, I think you've got to roll a dice and go for it, right? I mean, that's what the draft is pretty much. It's a lottery for a lot of the time for those picks. As in terms of the second one, I do like Marvin Harrison Jr. I think if he's sitting there at say 4 or 5, and then the Bears are there, then I think get him. One thing I do hope the Bears don't do is sort of draft back. I'd like to see them draft the best, available person at that position, at that spot. And whether that's Harrison or if he's gone, then I think the second option is probably then go to the trenches for sure, because I do need help there as well. But I'm warming to the idea, even though I'm warming to Justin Fields, I'm warming to the idea of if they've got that number 1 pick, just draft Caleb Williams, go and do it, because you do need that quarterback play so desperately, and you've needed it for such a long time. Even in 2006 when they got to the Super Bowl, they had Rex Grossman. So I don't think we can put it on him as the reason for getting the Bears there. But the Bears have always been successful mostly because of their defense in my eyes, and a strong running game as well. You know, with the likes of obviously Matt Forte when he was there, and obviously there's Walter Payton and all the rest of them. So, but yeah, look, for me, I think Caleb Williams, if you said get him, my second choice would be Marvin Harrison Jr. And if he's not there, then I think, like Dan said, you know, hit the trenches and get someone high there. Let's say pick 4 or 5.
I'll run that over to Hallis Hall right now and see what they think.
Thanks, Jeff.
And I'm guessing they won't be upset if that happens. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with the quarterback prospects and how they shake out going down the pipeline. Because I think if they are keen on, like to Dan's point, keeping Fields around, they don't have a lot of picks in this draft either. They gave away a second round pick for Chase Claypool, which did not go well. I don't know if anyone knows that. But they don't have a lot of picks in this draft at all. So if they get a pick at the top and then trade back, and I don't know if there's guys at the back where they could bring a second round, third round quarterback in, like a Bo Nix or a Jaden Daniels, somewhere around of those names, and not be as big of a threat to Fields. But I don't know what they're going to do with the organization. But that goes. Let's throw it to the next question here from Jim Reynolds.
Jeff, sorry, I just want to, Dan made the point about lottery tickets, and one of the charts I did in the book was showing all the teams that passed on Patrick Mahomes.
Oh yeah.
And like, it's obviously easy to kill those teams in hindsight, but the thing that got me was how many of those teams wound up picking a quarterback within a year or two. Like, you can only kick the can down the road so far. Eventually you got to pick a quarterback, and that's a decision that's fraught with peril.
Well, and it used to be.
Yeah, I think Bears fans get quite a lot of stick for that still, in the sense of, they moved up one spot from 3 to 2 to draft Trubisky, which was, a bit of a silly trade in my eyes. But
and we were live on ICP when that happened, Justin.
I think we were, yeah. Actually,
yeah,
I think we were. And I was like, oh my God.
Well, Dan kind of set this up. We're going to go to the next question about offense. And we're talking right here. Jim Reynolds, do you feel it's better to build the trenches and then get the quarterback, or grab the franchise quarterback at all costs? So, either Dan or, Mark talking about infrastructure around a quarterback there earlier, as we hinted at the Packers. You've seen teams like with the New York Giants and Daniel Jones still with $36 million guaranteed. Now, you don't know what the future's like there because you don't know whether he is the franchise. What do you guys think about that question?
And if I can bolt on a couple more questions we got from chat. We have questions from both John Limbarakis and John Carpenter about, like, if we're talking about building infrastructure, do you go with Marvin Harrison Jr., or do you go with one of the top tackle prospects? What helps the young quarterback more?
Man, there are so many variables here. I think, first of all, I was fascinated to hear Dan say you can't be afraid of taking another quarterback, because that's been like this simmering discussion. I know we're going to get to sort of the running backs don't matter conversation in a few minutes here, but it seems like the next evaluation, I know Kevin Cole, for example, talked a lot about, if you're the Bears this last draft a quarterback. Like, you don't know if you have the answer at Justin Fields, draft another quarterback. You've got to get it right. And there was initially some sort of pushback to that from sort of the old school people like me. But the more I've thought about it, the more I've thought, if you don't know if you have the quarterback, then you have your answer. You should go draft another one. And I think, in terms of building the infrastructure or drafting the quarterback, and then,
hey, Mark, real quick, do you think part of that, guys, is about the old, like, people are still locked on it, like it's the old cap? Because remember, it used to be like it was so detrimental to pick a guy number one.
Right,
and then,
you draft a guy number one, he's the highest paid player in the NFL. Like those days are gone. Like, it's not like the Matthew Stafford contract coming out. But I also think it sort of goes to the importance of the position. Number one, you've got to make sure that you get it right. And number two is this, like, if you've got the evaluation part right and you draft the right quarterback, whether it's the first go round or the second go round, the other stuff's going to fall. We've got recent examples of, Joe Burrow a couple of years ago. Like, the Bengals weren't really ready. They didn't have the talent around him, but they got the evaluation of him right. I think we could sort of agree on that. Certainly looks like Houston's gotten it right with CJ Stroud. But then on the flip side, you have the guy that went right before him, Bryce Young, and it seems like, well, he might need a little bit more help. Now, you have to go and sort of get that for them. But I think I just come down to it, given the importance of the position, given the new math and the new economics of it, if you draft a quarterback and you miss, okay, well, it's not going to come at the detriment from a financial standpoint of now you can't sign a left tackle. Now you can't sign a tight end or a receiver. You could still do those things. And if 2 years down the road or a year down the road, you feel like you're going to take another swing at it, take another swing at it, because you got to get it right. Like again, Patriots guy, you see the ball, it's right there, and the helmet's right there. Like you got to get it right.
I think there's a couple of things with this argument. One, the quarterback piece, when you have a draft class that is full of names, those top slots become quarterback slots, one way or the other. I remember having this conversation when Gettleman was on the clock and everybody knew he was going to take Barkley, right? So the Jets only had to trade at 3 because it was a known deal that Barkley was going to go 2. And he was talking about the gold jacket. And I made an argument on the record saying, like, this is a quarterback slot. Like, either take the quarterback here or trade it to someone who will, because this is a quarterback slot that the value is there. So if you're the Bears, for example, right, and you're sitting there at number 1 and you have complete conviction in Fields, not that I think they do, but let's say you do, it's still a quarterback spot, just like they did with Bryce last year. Trade it, acquire those other picks, because now the Bears are sitting there with 2 picks again. They could do that again and sit there with 2 picks again, and they could do that until they're ready to pull the trigger and use all that capital to go get somebody if they haven't figured it out. But that's a quarterback spot. In terms of the infrastructure, I mean, a good offensive line, in my opinion, has 3 good players. Like, I don't know what positions, right? It varies. It's not just left tackle. It's not just center or right guard. You just need 3 guys, right? You can figure it out from there. The Saints with Drew Brees did it with a guard and 2 guards and a center, right? It was Nix, and it was Evans, and it was before Unger, and the tackles were Zach Strief. I mean, like, and it was Drew, step up. We're gonna run everything past you. We'll figure it out from there. Like, you need 3 guys, and it's hard to get that. It's still hard to sustainably keep 3 good players around, let alone 4. 4 is an elite unit, right? That's the Phillies of the world, have those 4th guys. So you try to get there. Everyone's trying to get there. You're trying to get there all the time. I wouldn't pass on a quarterback I had conviction in to get that guy. It'd be nice if I had all 3 before I got the quarterback. But to the point about Burrow, like, you can build that. It helps a guy like CJ to have Tunsil out there. But if they didn't have Tunsil, I don't think CJ would completely fall into a puddle. So, from there, it's about, what do you want? Do you want, this was Chase versus Sewell, right? The Bengals pick.
Yeah.
I think the thing that's hard there with the quarterback versus the lineman is that in a vacuum, I think most people would go line because quarterback's deeper, right? There's less linemen than there are wide receivers deeper than offensive line. But there was the connection to the player, right? They'd played together. I think there's that bond and being on the same page, which we talked about with Love and all the young receivers, that Burrow was able to put Chase into positions and vice versa that you wouldn't have gotten with any wide receiver from that standpoint. So I think most of us would go with the line before the skill guys, because there's just so many more skill guys.
I think it's the remarkable thing about Stroud this year too, is if you looked at the Texans roster before the year, they didn't have a fully fleshed out offensive line or a skill group that's going to cause anyone to write home. I mean, you got Tank Dell out there, you got Nico Collins. He's doing it with guys that are relatively unknown. That's made it that much more remarkable about what he's doing. I think Bryce Young's got the same situation. They traded away but the best skill guy he had in DJ Moore, and they've got the same thing on the offensive line. So I think they're gonna have to do more on both sides. But I think CJ Stroud is just an anomaly where I can't believe what he's doing. It's remarkable. We're gonna move over to we're running out of time because we are just full of content. We're moving to the defensive side of the ball here. Jerome Gray asks, what key and fundamental traits do you want when evaluating the linebacker position? Now, linebacker position, stand-up linebacker, or are we talking outside linebacker, edge? I'm guessing this is the traditional 3-down inside linebacker. But Dan, do you have a response on that one?
Anticipation. The term instincts is the one that's popularly used. I have an issue with it because I think it suggests like something you're born with. I think these guys develop that pattern recognition over time, and they turn into a craft. Jerry Angelo has this line about there's 2 types of guys playing in the league, right? You have athletes playing professional football, and you have professional football players. And the guys that are special at linebacker are professional football players. And it's a craft to them, and they take it seriously, and they understand all the cues and the tendencies, and they can anticipate, right? And it's not just, is it run, is it pass? It's not just, do they hit? It's not just, can they cover? You better have all of that. You better be a high-level generalist, or you're not going to be in the conversation, right? You're going to have a certain level of size and a certain level of athletic ability. You're going to have all that stuff to be even considered in a starting 3-down backer in the National Football League these days. But if you're actually going to perform, you got to be anticipatory.
Got it. Josh Z asks, I love this one. Where do you see defensive personnel evolving to in the next 3 to 5 years? And that's for anyone here.
But I think we have a similar question from Josh Bowman, who asked, I just had it. I'm doing great, guys.
Was it in the chat? Was it in the chat?
High-powered offenses.
How has the evolution of the modern offense affected the construction of modern NFL defenses? Do you think the advent of high-powered passing offenses has caused teams to drastically rethink the players and archetypes they're likely to target? I think this is interesting. I think like as you go more spread, we have more of these kind of hybrid second level players who can kind of do some slot corner stuff, kind of some safety stuff, kind of some linebacker stuff. And the other thing I think is really interesting as we move to more of a spread world, if you're defending the run with just 6 guys in the box because they're spreading you out, those 6 guys have to be able to defend the run. And I wonder if we're going to see more value placed on those kind of, and I don't think the colleges are turning out a lot of them, but those like old school, like nose tackle types who can 2-gap. Because if you can change the math there up front, I think that can have a big impact if you're defending the run from spread looks. And obviously, if there are some teams who cut against the grain like the Ravens have and decide we're going to run like gap power duo, you're going to need to be stout at the point of attack too. So I wonder if those kind of interior defensive linemen end up being a solution to kind of both extremes of offenses approaches as we move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that was, you look at Jalen Carter and what he's been able to do so far with the Eagles, where you can, even if it's not your traditional 2-gap, you can say gap and a half, right? So you can steal at least half a gap. I think, the Illinois kid, Newton, who I think is one of my favorite players in all of college football. Like, I think he's a player that you might be able to do some of that stuff with. And so I think that's a fascinating point, Dave. We might see more of a value of interior defensive linemen. And when you're trying to change that numbers game, because again, when, we talk about so much of the modern offense versus defense, you think about box counts and things like that. It's really gap counts. Like, can you somehow steal a gap back or half a gap back as a defense, or are you going to have to play single high because you have to bring that safety down? And, so much of the game right now is that 2-high world where defenses want to live in that 2-high structure to eliminate the explosive plays, to Josh's point. But that's opened up sort of a rebirth of the running game. Like, you look at the Miami Dolphins, and one of the things that's made them so successful this year is you certainly want to stay too high with Tyreek and Waddle, but that's allowed them to get 5 yards, 6 yards a pop in the run game because they're running against these light boxes. Do you have a defensive lineman that can steal a gap for you to allow you to still stay in that 2-high structure? So I think are we going to get to a world where we're suddenly saying, hey, forget running backs matter, and interior defensive linemen, they really matter in today's NFL?
I think we're kind of there. I think, to Dave's point, the supply of them is limited, but when you look at the Jordan Davises and Derek Browns and the Vita Veas, right? And we've seen those big bodies be drafted in premium draft capital, even when everyone was saying, like, where can these guys pass rush? Like, what are we expecting from there? But I think teams were understanding they have to change the math inside. And I think the NFL game is behind the college game in terms of some of those developmental things. And as we continue offensively to push a little closer to the college game, I think that those college defensive structures are going to continue to come in. And you start to look at the tight fronts, and you look at the way Iowa State's playing defense. You look at the way that Georgia's playing defense, right? The conversation On the young man that Jacksonville took #1 overall. For some reason, my mind's going blank right
Walker.
now. Walker, right? And
Walker.
he admits like they didn't teach me to pass rush, right? Because
Yep.
we're gap control, right? We're changing the math up front. These big, huge, stout guys changing the math up front so that we can detach and we can get to too high coverages. We can do all these things. I think it's those guys, and I think to Dave's point, that detached second level player, whether it was Miles Jack back at UCLA, a few years back, to the Derwin James, to the Minka Fitzpatricks, like that college role, not that it's always transitioned one-to-one to the NFL side, but that college role, I think those guys are going to continue to have a value in the NFL because you look at the body types that are playing as number 2 or number 3 to a formation, right? And it varies. And you're getting big bodies and little bodies and small bodies and fast bodies and the whole 9 yards. You got to have a versatile piece in there who also has to play a run gap. Like I think those two pieces are critical in trying to get both, but at least trying to have one.
All right, fellas. Well, I hate to be the one calling the cops on this great party, but I will. We have time to fit in one more question here, and it's going to be about the future. This one's from Andy Likens. And Dave, let me know if there's anything similar in the chat here. What are some of the more forward-thinking teams incorporating analytics into all facets of decision-making and team building? So what are some of the more forward-thinking teams now incorporating analytics?
I think he also says who should we be looking for as future coaches and GMs along those lines. So.
And Dan's got the beat on that one with his future GM rankings.
When I saw that question, I think that data-driven decision-making is here. I think that between the tracking data, right, the RFID chips and the pads now, or as we call it, next-gen stat data, but more so even just the computer vision, the AI stuff, like we're able to recreate a lot of what the physical chip is doing at the pro level into the college tape now. There's groups out there. We work with one called Telemetry that do that kind of work. I think between that and the UIs and just the advancement of cloud technology and being able to get to whatever you want to slice and dice in terms of film and study so much more easy and efficient than we've ever seen before, we're able to drive to that context that was always that differentiating point between the old school and the new school, right? Because the new school would look at the global data, right? All of football. And the coach would say, yeah, but how does that relate to my team? It has to relate to this situation and this roster. And we finally have the tools and technology to take, a global point, but then actually put it into that context and do those things. I think if you're not there, like if you haven't already been seriously investing in that, you're going to be on the sideline short of having a Patrick Mahomes at quarterback. You're going to be on the sidelines for a long time because those teams are out and ahead and you'd be in a serious catch-up mode. And looking at some of the names, it was interesting going back to my 2020 research on it. Because some of the survey that I do when I ask, like, who are those multi-track minds? Who are those next level thinkers? Some of the names that came up were Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, Joe Shane, Ryan Poles, Monty Ossenfort, Dave Ziegler all came up and were hired that next cycle or two. The names that are still on that list we've yet to see are now the current Raiders interim GM, Champ Kelly, Chiefs exec Chris Shea, Giants exec Brandon Brown, Bears exec Ian Cunningham, Bills exec Terrence Gray, and Seattle exec Matt Berry, I think, are the ones left from that list. People should keep an eye on.
That's great stuff. Ian Cunningham has been talked about, it feels like forever, as far as being the next guy for a GM job. So that's it for the night, guys. I'm going to throw it over to everyone here to close it out and to get your plugs in. As someone that doesn't have anything at all to plug, let me just say, Dave, thank you for doing this and putting together. It was an absolute treat to get together with you all. And, I learned so much from Dan and Mark and Dave from being inside the pylon for those years. So this is bringing it back as someone that just wants to get back involved in football some way, somehow, eventually. It was nice to scratch this itch. So Dave, thanks for doing this again. And again, very proud of you for putting this book out. And I know you're going to plug the Epilepsy Awareness Month later. Thanks for doing that as well. Buy the book, review the book, and it's the holidays, guys. You've got football fans in your life. I know what you can buy them. Dan, I'll throw it over to you.
That's my plug. Buy the book, guys. The book's fantastic. You're going to learn from it. Other people are going to want it as well. It's a great gift to pass out. Please get those reviews up there. I'm sure you're going to rate it high. And the Epilepsy Foundation, folks, please, if you can.
Yeah, I've got a bit of a confession to make. I haven't bought the book yet, so I need to do that pretty quickly.
What?
I know. You know what? I might actually do that today. I should actually do that today. I have just found something though, bit of a nostalgic turn that I still got, and I still wear to
Wow.
this day.
There we go.
There it is.
Wow.
Still wear that to this day. I think Chuck sent me that from memory. Yes, very comfortable, keeps me cool in this hot weather, so it's a good to wear. But yeah, look, again, I think to mirror Jeff, Dan, go buy the book. I haven't, but I should, and I will. Don't be like me. Don't hang around. Go get it, and obviously donate to the foundation as well, obviously. But it's been great to be on, gents, and we should do this again soon. Maybe even around draft time, and sort of extend on that sort of draft talk. I think that'd be a fun thing to do, and we can get some of these guys listening in onto that as well. And yeah, do things like this a little bit more often. Be really, really fun to do.
Yeah, I mean, let me just look. It's right here. I've got it on the Kindle. And I put it literally. I was so excited when I saw Dave mention this book up front because they're basically in my mind on par. And Dave, that's what you've accomplished, which I think speaks for itself. You've done absolutely brilliant work with this. I couldn't be prouder to be associated with the group that we're here tonight. It's great to see so many great faces and familiar faces, and to be able to talk ball a little bit. Definitely miss those ITP days. Those were some wonderful memories for me that I will always cherish. Donate to the foundation, buy the book, review the book. Dave has done a tremendous job here. For every football fan in your life, give them a gift for the holidays. For every non-football fan in your life, I don't care, give them a copy, because there's non-football lessons here too. Dave, you should just absolutely be so proud of what you've done, because it's a tremendous accomplishment.
Well, thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate all the kind words and all of you taking time out to do this. Jeff, thank you for emceeing this. Dan and Mark, thank you guys so much for participating here. Everybody who joined and asked questions, I wish we could have gotten to all of them. We had a few more we were trying to get to.
Yeah,
but
we're gonna the mark.
The discussion was great.
Yeah, that's for round two.
Sounds good. Yeah, so buy the book. It's on Amazon. I'll send something out after this with the links to it, and to everybody's Twitter handles, and also to the give.epilepsy.com link if you have the opportunity and means to contribute there. I think that'd be great. So thanks, everybody. This was awesome. It was a lot of fun. I hope everybody had fun, and I had a great time.
Good to see you guys. Take care, and we'll speak soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Great to see everybody.
Bye.